Yeah, so apparently True Lies is on everybody's minds all of a sudden. Like Jamie Lee Curtis is tweeting out Bernie Sanders memes connected to True Lies. There's this show that's given us a season order at CBS All Access.
What a coincidence, though, eh?
Yeah. So I mean,
like neither of us knew this was going to happen. We just thought of True Lies because I think I'd been talking about this movie for a while. And finally, we both got around to watching it again.
Yeah, and I just so happened to be watching a handful of other Arnold movies recently that I hadn't seen that have become available on Netflix and other places. So, yeah, it was kind of in an Arnold Schwarzenegger mood. So it made sense to check True Lies off the list.
Right. Because this was your first time watching True Lies. Like, what did you know about it beforehand, though?
I knew about it just in the sense of like it's held up there as one of his better 90s efforts. And it had lots of one-liners, but I didn't know anything about the story. I didn't know anything about James Cameron's involvement or anything like that. So yeah, I did go into it pretty fresh.
I mean, I don't want to spoil it because we'll get into it, but did it meet your expectations? Overall, like without getting too much into it, like did you come out of it thinking, hey, I was pretty entertained for 2.5 hours?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that runtime, we'll get into that runtime, but yeah, it definitely delivered. It gave me everything that I expected from it. But then and we'll get into this part as well too, another teaser, but I had recently seen Last Action Hero for the first time, and I think I still sort of prefer that one to True Lies,
okay.
but we'll talk about that.
Okay. All right. So this is a good time to just seg into the intro then, hey?
Yeah, let's do it.
Welcome to the first episode of Jason and Robert Watch Old Movies. My name is Jason Chen, and I'll be your host, and I'm joined by my co-host, Robert Snow.
Hey.
Robert and I came up with this idea because when we first met through our shared love for movies, we also quickly realized that we had really different experiences with movies growing up. We watched different things, we watched them at different ages, and when we met, we'd always suggest old movies to each other, and it was always fun to go back and rewatch them with a different perspective and have a fresh conversation about what we thought. So in this first episode of Jason and Robert Watch Movies, we're taking a look at Arnold Schwarzenegger's True Lies from 1994.
It's not like he's saving the world or anything.
I see, this is the problem with terrorists. They're really inconsiderate when it comes to people's schedules. Could you press the button for the top floor, please?
Hi, Helen. Harry forgot something back at the office.
Whenever I can't sleep, I just ask him to tell me about his day. 6 seconds and I'm out.
And like we were saying in the cold open, like this kind of just happened organically. It was a bit of a blind spot for me, something that I somehow skipped over in all of my other Schwarzenegger watches over the years.
Well, to be fair, we were like toddlers when this first came out, right?
Somehow you got to jump on me on that. So
I watched this like definitely in like primary school, like kindergarten age.
Thanks, Jason's mom.
Yes, thank you, Mom.
Yeah, because this like True Lies is definitely a hard R in terms of language and violence. So
it is, but you know, like it's interesting that you mentioned that because I feel like today's movies are definitely more violent.
Yeah, like this is kind of cartoonish violence, but it still has it has a high body count and it has a lot of people getting shot and stuff in it.
Right. But it's not bloody in that sense.
But yeah, so True Lies, this is a 1994 movie directed by James Cameron. 3 writers on it, Claude Zidi, Simon Michel, DJ Kaminka. I think this is because they took a French screenplay and adapted it.
Yeah, and so the French movie actually had a character named Simon, and they actually have a character in this one played by Bill Paxton called Simon. And I think that was supposed to be like a callback.
I see.
But one of the most interesting things was that True Lies was, I think, one of the first films to have $100 million budget, which is huge in 94. If you translate that to 2018 dollars, I think that's like $175 million. For comparison's sake, Skyscraper with Dwayne Johnson with The Rock cost $125 million. And I really wonder, like, if you were to shoot True Lies now, you wouldn't need $176 million, would you?
No, I don't think so. I mean, if you were keeping all the effects kind of at the level that they currently are, you know, you probably wouldn't need to rent 2 whole Marine Harrier jets like they do at the end of this film.
Yeah.
And certain other things like, you know, spoilers ahead, but like there's a nuclear explosion that goes off at one point, and that could have probably been done fairly cheaply on like a average computer.
I was going to say too, like I was kind of surprised when I read this because it doesn't feel like a really super big budget movie. There are explosions, yeah, but when I think of $100 million budget, I'm thinking like almost Avengers level type of like scale and CGI. But I guess in this one, I mean, other than a couple set pieces, I really wonder like where the budget went. Like, did it go to Arnold's salary? I feel like that's where most of the money went.
A huge chunk probably did, yeah.
So it was interesting for that reason. Definitely with CGI now, like these explosions, you could do it cheap, right? At home with any software.
Yeah. But you wouldn't have Schwarzenegger and you wouldn't have James Cameron. So
very true.
Those are very important ingredients there. But we should do a quick plot synopsis for people who have either seen it. They've either seen it so far in the past that they can barely remember it, or they're like me and they hadn't watched it and they're curious about it. So True Lies has got a very kind of almost like a Saturday morning serial type of setup to it, where Arnold Schwarzenegger plays a seemingly unassuming computer salesman by day who is actually hiding his real job of a super spy from his wife, played by Jamie Lee Curtis. And he actually belongs to a national security agency that's even more secretive than the CIA. It's the Omega Force, and they have an underground, like a bunker type office that they have to go through like 15 doors, right? Kind of like Get Smart style to get into.
Yeah, like Men in Black. And if you look at the seal, like there's a big shot, bird's eye of the seal that they have.
Yeah, on the floor.
And at the bottom, the motto is the last line of defense.
Yes.
It like totally doesn't take itself too seriously.
Yeah, and then not long after that little reveal shot of like this agency, we get into the mission briefing room and we see that it's led by a character played by Charlton Heston with this massive scar and this eye patch. Yeah, and he's
Nick Fury.
Yeah, basically, yeah, Nick Fury before. I guess Nick Fury was in the comics at that point, but the same basic idea of like a impossible mission force IMF style setup that's even more secret than the CIA. Like they think the CIA are pansies or whatever, and girly men, as Arnold would say.
And so what happens is Harry Tasker, Arnold Schwarzenegger, gets tied up in this plot involving Middle Eastern terrorists called the Crimson Jihad.
Yes.
And they had stolen a nuclear warhead and smuggled it into the U.S. through a antiquities dealer played by Tia Carrere.
Several nuclear warheads, actually. I think there's 4 of them.
Yes. Yeah, several. We only see one, though, I think, right?
No, we see
one blow up and we see one
gets detonated, and then there are 2 others loaded on trucks, and then there's a final one on a helicopter.
Right. And so Harry Tasker and his sidekick, Albert,
yeah, played by Tom Arnold.
Yeah, played by Tom Arnold. So they have kind of like this buddy cop sort of relationship where Tom Arnold's the funny man, the casual guy, the whatever, and Arnold Schwarzenegger is both the brains and the muscle.
Yes.
And so they're tasked, they get wrapped up in this terrorist plot, and then somehow Jamie Lee Curtis gets pulled into it, and she gets pulled into it because there's subplot because she's unhappy with her really boring marriage with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yeah, she thinks that he's just going off to work conventions all the time and doesn't have any time for, family get-togethers or anything like that.
Right. And it's funny because it's actually set up quite well because in this first scene where they interact, you can kind of get the feeling that there's a distance between 2 of them. And so Jamie Lee Curtis, she's complaining about, having to fix the washroom and it's going to cost $600 and it's too much. And then Arnold's character, Harry, was like, well, what do you want to do about it? And she kind of jokingly says, well, the repair guy said if I sleep with him, he'll take $100 off.
Yeah.
And then Arnold's like, oh, okay. Or kisses her on the cheek and just walks away. Like it just doesn't register to him.
Yeah.
Anyway, so like right away, you definitely get the action because the movie starts with this like heist sequence.
Yeah, ripped right out of James Bond.
Yes. And then you get the comedy sequence with the family life and Tom Arnold. And then away we go. This movie is known for some like really ridiculous sequences.
Yes.
And a lot of one-line quotes, which is why I love this film. Just to start off with, what did you think of the sequence where the terrorists he runs after, they have that fight in the bathroom? That's very reminiscent of Mission Impossible Fallout, right?
Yeah, it almost feels like Fallout was referencing that to an extent.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's a foot race, and then there's actually like an actual horse race where the terrorist gets on a Kawasaki motorcycle and Arnold Schwarzenegger commandeers a horse and chases him through a mall.
Yeah, it goes right through this like all over downtown Washington D.C. and then right into through a hotel, interrupts a wedding. Gets into the hotel elevator, and they're like going up at different rates up in individual elevators, and they're finally reaching the absolute top floor, the roof of the hotel, and the terrorist, because he's got balls of steel, guns his motorcycle right off the roof and into the pool of a neighboring building.
Yeah, lands perfectly into a pool. And if you like watch the trajectory of the bike going off the roof, there's no way he would have made that jump.
But then Harry Tasker, Arnold Schwarzenegger's character, even though he's riding a horse, he tries to spur the horse into doing the exact same thing.
Did you actually think the horse was going to jump though? Because I remember the first time I watched this, I was like, oh my God, is he actually going to do it?
No, I know any horse is too smart to actually like commit suicide. So I would think. So yeah, the horse stops right before he's about to jump off, and then Arnold has to be pulled back up to the lip of the building by the poor old horse.
And I think that sets the tone for the rest of the movie.
It does, because it's so ridiculous. It's so over the top. And I mean, you could argue that some parts of the opening James Bondian sequence in Switzerland were also very over the top and very setting the tone. But this just takes it up to 11, and then it stays at 11 for almost the entire thing. And I was rereading Roger Ebert's review back from '94 when this came out, and he said that, you know, most action movies of the period would be happy just to have that one horse versus motorcycle chase as the big action set piece. But this movie has like 4 or 5 other major action set pieces at the exact same energy level.
Right.
So that's just that kind of gives you a taste of like, all right, this thing is, it's self-aware. It's not as self-aware as Last Action Hero is. Right. But at least it knows it's not presenting this stuff to you super seriously, which I think is pretty essential to staying on this movie's wavelength.
Yeah. And I don't know if you noticed, but in the beginning scene where he's infiltrating that palace or mansion, whatever it is, and he's greeting all these like random people in different languages, there's a scene where he comes out and he speaks Arabic to like this henchman. And in the subtitles, there's actually in brackets, it says perfect Arabic.
Yeah, perfect Arabic.
Did you notice that?
Yeah.
I thought that was hilarious. Like, as if to say, you know what? We just have to drive home the fact that Arnold Schwarzenegger speaks perfect Arabic, even though he has this thick Austrian accent. Yeah. And that somehow this is the reason he gets away with it, because the subtitle says he gets to get away with it with his perfect Arabic.
Oh, that was a great little detail. And this is the era of James Cameron's filmmaking where I think he was at the absolute peak of his powers before he got kind of bogged down. Like, agreed. Titanic obviously broke the record for highest grossing movie, and then he went on to do it again with Avatar. But I feel like the bigger that Cameron got, the almost more aloof he became. And this movie is considerably more grounded, even though it has these absolutely insane, implausible fight scenes and action scenes.
Yeah, agreed. So interesting thing about this is James Cameron and Arnold Schwarzenegger actually later teamed up for Terminator 2.
Oh, wait, no, the Terminator 2 came out 3 years before True Lies.
Did it? Oh, right. Okay, sorry. Yeah, the other way around.
So it's the other, but the point still stands, because like they had already worked together, so they had a good working relationship.
Right. Actually, really interesting too. Like, this movie wasn't that well received by critics when it first released. 71% on Rotten Tomatoes, 63% on Metacritic. But it had a very, very good audience score, which is why it made over like 300 something million at the box office. And it's interesting that you brought up Titanic too, because I don't know if we want to get into this now, but there was supposed to be a sequel right after this was released.
No, I didn't know about that.
Okay, so let's dig in, Rob.
Okay, yeah. Well, you're the expert on this, so.
So because True Lies did so well, it was greenlit for a sequel. But James Cameron decided to do Titanic instead, which was released in 1997, and we all know that took a long time. Yada yada. And so after Titanic, he wanted to do True Lies, and Arnold was into it, Jamie Lee Curtis was into it, but it got delayed several times for various reasons. But then 9/11 hit. And in the original script for True Lies 2, there was supposed to be a scene that involves an airplane. Like, it didn't crash into a building, but it involved a scene with an airplane.
Right.
And I imagine, it had terrorists of some kind, because True Lies had your, very Hollywood archetypical or typical Middle Eastern terrorists,
Yes. Yeah.
They came back to True Lies and they said, you know what, like, considering what happened on 9/11 and considering the post 9/11 world, we just wouldn't be able to make this a funny action movie. It would be too serious. It'd be too sad. Actually, and I kind of did a little research, and there's an article written by a movie critic called Louis B. Hobson, who I believe actually now writes for the Calgary Herald.
Oh, okay.
And he got this quote from Cameron. He said, quote, "Terrorism is no longer something to take as lightly as we did in the first one. I just can't see it happening given the current world climate."
Right.
So True Lies 2, I'm sure, would have been made, but because we had this like awful event happen, it really shifted what we think is acceptable in action films.
Yeah.
And I think even though we haven't really moved away from, all Middle Eastern people are terrorists kind of trope from Hollywood, I think we are a little more conscious about that, because in this film, they go pedal to the metal with those stereotypes.
Like, I think one of the things that 9/11 did to the way movies, action movies and like national security related movies, was to kind of turn the temperature down on the tactics, because in True Lies you see them commandeering these nuclear warheads from Kazakhstan, and in the 90s there was all these fears that this was, it popped up in other movies too, like Sum of All Fears and things like that, where like nuclear warheads were kind of out there, and we didn't really know what was happening with the Soviet Union collapsing in the early 90s, and maybe their nukes would end up in the wrong hands, but of course none of that ended up happening. But I think that those fears kind of percolated into pop culture, and so you end up with plots like True Lies where these Middle Eastern terrorists are able to figure out how to detonate these bombs and to transport them around the United States without anybody realizing. And they actually are able to detonate one, and they set one off in the Florida Keys and nobody's killed, but it's like, compared to the very kind of grounded way that 9/11 happened in a perverse sort of way, where all it took was some guys hijacking a plane with some box cutters. Like, the idea of setting off a nuke is just kind of beyond belief, I think, at this point.
Mm-hmm. It just didn't seem like a very real threat at the time in the 90s, because they also like really poke fun at these terrorists. Like, at one point, the villain, Aziz, I think his name is.
Yeah, Salim Abu Aziz.
Okay, yeah, the main villain, Salim Abu Aziz. He's sort of making this video with this, like, message to America.
Yeah.
And the joke is that the camera who's filming him has a low battery. Yeah. And he's like sweating profusely because he doesn't want to stop filming, because if he stops filming, this guy's going to kill him. Yeah. But he also doesn't want to tell the villain that there's a low battery, because he's going to get mad at him.
Yes.
And I think that just wouldn't have been the right tone. So unfortunately, even though we didn't get the sequel, this is one of those times where I totally understand why they just gave up on it.
And then the other thing that popped up in some of the criticism I was reading from the time, from 94, was the whole business with the second act of this movie, which is the primary reason why it is 2 hours and 24 minutes long. Like, it's a long movie. Yes. And it's a bit of a flight of fancy, because you're expected to believe that Harry Tasker, Arnold Schwarzenegger's character, is this super committed guy. He's good at his job. He takes things very seriously. but yet he's able to get completely sidetracked when he suspects that his wife is cheating on him. And he redirects all of these agency resources, guys, helicopters, an interrogation room.
He cuts a trailer in half, for crying out loud.
Yeah, he just all this collateral damage in an effort to figure out whether or not his wife is actually having an affair. And it's all of that stuff that distracts him long enough to actually let the real bad guys that he was supposed to be tailing the whole time get a few steps ahead of him, so that later when he's about to seduce his wife after this kind of klutzy striptease that she pulls off, because of this lengthy series of events where she's been kind of worked into this non-existent plot that's kind of a prank on her, and then the real bad guys burst in to kidnap them both, and Arnold thinks that it's all part of the setup that he engineered. So it's a kind of a messy kind of thing that happens, and it's played for a joke, like it's intended as a joke. But you can definitely see points in that setup where they could have thinned it out a little bit, maybe made a few kind of chops or simplified it, just so the whole thing isn't as long as it is. Because you do start to feel the length round about the time where like the nuke has gone off in the Florida Keys. Like you're thinking to yourself, surely that is the climax of this movie. But no, there's a whole other thing in downtown Miami with the Harrier jet and the missiles and stuff. So
this is why I think actually it could work as a TV series, because the whole dynamic where Harry's trying to hide his real identity from Helen, but Helen figures it out, but Harry's still trying to deny the fact that he's a spy. There's multiple directions you can run with that. Can we just talk about, though, Bill Paxton as the guy who's trying to seduce Helen?
Yeah.
The used car salesman?
I've never seen Bill Paxton play such a loser before.
I know, such an annoying loser. But you know what? There's a part of it where like he's kind of likable because he's legitimately funny. But it also feels like a role that, I don't know, like Jim Carrey should be playing, not Bill Paxton.
Yeah. It's really interesting casting. But I mean, I think Paxton pulls it off. It's just
oh, totally, 100%. He's the biggest sleazeball in this movie, and to be fair, a lot of characters do a lot of sleazy things.
But yeah, like the whole thing with his character would very much make more sense in a TV setup where he could be a recurring character who pops up more than just because he's in the big. He takes over a big chunk of the second act of this movie, and then he pops up for a little cameo type scene at the end.
Yeah.
So you could see in a TV show, he could be popping up every couple of episodes as this kind of recurring guy who keeps crossing paths with the protagonists.
Right. So if you could split the film into 3 parts, the first part would be like a straight action type movie where, you know, it's good guys versus terrorists. The second one is a bit of like a family comedy.
Yes.
Because the subplot becomes the main plot where Helen's affair takes center stage, and we literally don't see the terrorists for a good, you know, chunk of the screen.
Yeah, it has to be like 30-40 minutes,
something like that. And then like the third act is like this big battle, this Armageddon, where like he becomes basically the last action hero and he has to save the day. Speaking of all these like different sort of high points, was there a part that you thought was completely ridiculous and made you laugh out loud?
Yeah, the one part, and it's probably going to, a lot of people might see this coming, is the final one-liner when he actually kills the main bad guy. Because this kind of protracted sequence plays out where Arnold is piloting this Harrier jump jet, which is hovering in downtown Miami, and there's
a ball joke in there too, right?
Yeah, his daughter is clinging to the shattered cockpit, and the bad guy is also scuttling around on the back of this aircraft that's like hovering, and they're kind of, you know, slipping and sliding and all this stuff. And then finally Arnold tilts the jet so that the bad guy gets hooked on the front end of one of the wingtip missiles.
You're fired.
But not only does he fire the missile with the bad guy hanging off the front of it, but he aims it in such a way that it goes through the giant hole that he's cut through the building with the cannon, and fires it at the bad guy helicopter on the other side of the building. Blows up all of the remaining terrorists in one go. So, but that is such like that is like, I laughed because it was stupid, but it was also exactly what you'd expect from a self-aware Arnold Schwarzenegger 90s action flick.
It was very satisfying, to be sure. So it was always really funny to me how like Arnold in that Harrier jet completely decimates a floor and that building is still standing.
Yeah.
And he somehow shoots that missile directly through, hits a helicopter. And by the way, like every single vehicle that explodes in this movie, the explosion is like 10 times bigger than what it should be.
Yes.
There's a part where they're racing along the highway and then the Harrier jet takes out part of the bridge. And then there's a truck that comes in and it's not even really carrying anything, but it hangs off and then it teeters and then it falls down. And normally you just think, okay, it's going to crash and then hit the water and sink. But nope, there's like a giant fireball that comes up.
Yes.
And there's another sequence where the bad guys are trying to shoot a rocket launcher at him.
Yeah.
And they aim it the wrong way.
Yes.
And they end up like shooting the passenger out of the front windshield.
Yeah. And then he gets run over by the truck. And
yeah. You're just like, wow, that is so ridiculous. I can't believe whoever thought of that was just on acid or something.
Yeah, I can only imagine what the storyboarding meetings were like for this movie, like James Cameron and the other production guys on this, because they must have been just throwing ideas around like crazy, just sort of like, what can we kind of jam together? And it did work, you know. I mean, there's a lot of movies that kind of overdo it with that sort of stuff, and it feels like too much. But here, the tone is just right.
And also, like, we just kind of accept the fact that Arnold, with no real like prior hint that he could fly a jet, just hops into a jet and flies it perfectly.
Yeah. And then of course you get Tom Arnold kind of like wandering around being like, oh, it's been 10 years since you were in the pilot seat of one of these things. And like, and then he's kind of explaining to one of the Marines whose jet it was. He's like, oh, you know, he did 100 hours. Don't worry. Like, he's got his training.
Yeah, I'll sign for it. No worries. So is "You're fired" your like favorite quote of the movie? Because there's a ton.
Well, the "You're fired" scene is the kind of thing that you would edit into a YouTube compilation of best action movie one-liners. Like, it is the one,
right?
But
well, I've got a few written down. So one of the ones that kind of comes back later is "We do not have time to tango."
Oh yeah.
And every time he goes to these galas on a secret mission, he ends up meeting a beautiful woman. And in the first scene, he asks Tia Carrere to tango, and in the last scene, he asks his wife to tango. So I actually like the symmetry of that.
Sure,
because there's a callback, and it makes sense. Another one I loved was, so there's a sequence where Helen is driving with Simon, and Simon kind of says, hey, like, make sure no one's watching and just, like, duck.
Yeah.
And so Arnold asks a helicopter to tail him, and then they're talking about what's going on in the car, and they're like, okay, well, it looks like Helen's head is in her lap, and Arnold starts going crazy because he thinks like Arnold thinks she's doing like something else, but then Tom Arnold, I think it was, he just goes, well, maybe she's just sleeping.
Yeah, maybe she's just sleepy. That's number 2 on my list, I think.
Yeah, and then there's another part where Tom Arnold's talking about, you know, how I've been divorced 3 times, don't worry about it, like, she's having an affair, whatever, screw her, you'll find someone else. And then Arnold just turns around and goes,
Stop cheering me on.
Yeah. Yeah, he has a habit of like pinning Tom Arnold to whatever hard surfaces nearby and kind of holding him up by the front of his clothes and, you know, dangling him about a foot off the ground.
Right. Jamie Lee Curtis, by the way, like, got a lot of attention for this role. She actually won, I think, a Golden Globe.
Oh, yeah, I believe it. Yeah.
She screams a lot in this movie, though.
Especially, towards the end when she gets involved in the action scenes. Yeah, she becomes a bit of a scream queen. Not that, I mean, that's her career is partially based on that because of her work in the Halloween movies.
Right.
So it comes naturally to her. But I mean, I think her style of comedy and Arnold's style of comedy work very well together.
Perfect fit.
Especially that striptease / seduction scene where, you know, she's trying to be sexy, but she's kind of like stumbling over herself.
Falls down on the floor at one point.
And then tries to recover.
Right. So actually it's good that you mentioned that because when this movie was released, there were also some criticism that it was misogynistic and sexist. And Watching it now, you know, I kind of get it, but I don't think it was offensive. It wasn't supposed to be sexual or anything. It was supposed to be funny.
Yes. Yeah.
Even though she's wearing lingerie, of course, but it's done in a way where Arnold loses his cool. Jamie Lee Curtis is trying to be something she's not and pulls it off quite well.
So should we talk about the show that's been greenlit for CBS based on this movie?
Sure.
Because like we were saying, like this sort of popped up right when we were planning this episode, and we were like, that's kind of weird timing. But so apparently McG is working on a TV adaptation of this movie, and Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis will not be back. So I guess they'll get some new hot things.
That's a shame.
Yeah. It would be fun if like Schwarzenegger and Jamie Lee Curtis came in as like in their, we catch up with their characters in modern day or whatever.
Yeah. I'm sure like if the show is successful enough, they'll have cameos of some kind.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like I said in the beginning, like this whole double identity thing, marriage, infidelity thing, these are all like very much TV show plots.
Yes.
So I can see them really running away with it. And we didn't mention it yet, but Eliza Dushku plays his daughter.
Yeah.
And so in the show, I'm sure there will be certain scenes or certain characters that will, basically be their kids. And they'll get kidnapped at some point, be held ransom or hostage or whatever.
Eventually, though.
But it adds another layer to it, right?
Yeah, they can do more with the kids. They can kind of build up those characters a bit. I just wish that it wasn't McG who was involved in it, because he's very much, his entire career has been like a Michael Bay / James Cameron ripoff. Like
a ripoff, yes. He's not nearly as good.
He makes movies that are kind of stealing a lot of the ideas from the 90s directors who are way better than him at those things. And he never really adds to it. He never really puts his like any kind of unique spin on the ideas that he's reusing.
But maybe he's better suited for TV. I mean, we know one thing is that McG likes explosions.
Yeah.
So we'll probably see plenty of that in the TV show. The tone of the TV show is going to be interesting. Like, I mean, if it's going to be cable, how violent can you get?
If it's on CBS, like, I don't know if it's going to be on CBS, like the TV side of CBS, or if it's going to be on Paramount Plus, which is their new name for CBS All Access, their Netflix competitor.
Right.
So I guess, it would depend where they're putting it out, and that would probably decide the content and like how much they're going to get away with in terms of nudity or lack thereof or violence.
Yeah, I feel like they must be doing cable, because I think True Lies now is 25-year-old movie?
Yeah, it's 2027.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a generation of people who know True Lies, the Arnold movie, but there's also like a whole generation, I think, that they're trying to capture that's never seen True Lies, the movie.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I think if you've seen True Lies with Arnold, you've kind of got it in your head what you want the show to be like.
Right.
But for people who've never seen the show, like, it's a pretty interesting premise to begin with. It's an easy premise to begin with, I think. And I feel like we've seen this kind of show or plot all the time. Mr. and Mrs. Smith is one where, people are trying to lead normal lives, but they're actually spies. Spy Kids is another one, because at the end of True Lies, the whole family becomes a family of spies.
Yeah. So, and clearly, like, it is a very simplistic plot, but it's one that executed right with the right people, both behind and in front of the camera. It can kind of move beyond the very kind of basic outline. So I think it's really like, if the show is going to do well, they're really, really going to have to cast an interesting couple in the lead two roles.
Do you have?
I don't know who that would be. I mean, I think they would almost be better served to like pluck somebody who's like a non-star right now, who can kind of like develop the character around, because I feel like if you're looking for somebody who's doing a Schwarzenegger thing, obviously there's no one out there who's doing what Schwarzenegger does.
And also, finding someone who is good at both action and comedy is really hard.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
There's not many people who can do that. And you need a male and a female to be able to pull it off. Kind of goes back to like Arnold's charm. Like, we know he's a bodybuilder. We know he's an action star. But he's also like pretty good at playing the everyman. Yeah. There are times in the movie where I feel like, he could play it straight as a dramatic or a comedic role without the, the jumping and the running, and he'd be perfectly fine. And he actually did some of that in the 90s with like Junior and in Kindergarten Cop, maybe not to the same extent, but it was similar in that he made a really conscious decision to be portrayed as someone who is more relatable rather than a piece of meat, basically.
There's this paradox, where on the surface you have Arnold Schwarzenegger, who has a very obvious kind of role in movies, but you look at his work very closely and you see how much variety there actually is there, and how deliberate he's been about the roles that he's picked over the years. And that's continued even to the present day, where, he's getting older now. He's in his 70s and he can't do the action scenes the way he used to. So he's been picking roles where, there isn't as much action, and he's doing more contemplative stuff. Mm-hmm. It still tends to be like genre-based stuff. It's not like he's doing Oscar-nominated work or anything.
Okay, cool. You obviously enjoyed it, but any final thoughts, or do you have a final score?
Well, I came in when I was logging in on Letterboxd, I gave it 4 out of 5 because I feel like, it's not a masterpiece by action movie standards in my book. I still think that things like as turned up to 11, as I said, as this movie is,
you can see the movie's age.
Yeah, you can see the movie's age. You can see, it is, like we were saying, it's too long. That second act with the investigation of the affairs goes on too long, and it's taking away from what should be the central story. So it has all that kind of running against it. And I mentioned this in the beginning of the episode too, but having recently watched the movie that Arnold did the year before this, 93, Last Action Hero, I still think that one, even though it was totally savaged by critics and performed very badly at the box office when it came out, I think that movie, Last Action Hero, still does better commentary on Arnold as an action star.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because it's partly because the entire movie, Last Action Hero, features a kid who's running around and is aware that the character that Arnold's playing is a movie character. He's been sucked into the movies by this magical ticket. And granted, it's more of a kids-see, family-friendly type of movie, but I feel like not enough people give Last Action Hero the credit that it deserves for the commentary it's doing.
Agreed. I think you could say this about Arnold's entire 90s, mid 90s to late 90s filmography. I love True Lies and Last Action Hero because they never pretended to be something they're not. They were supposed to be fun, silly action movies, and Arnold doesn't take himself too seriously either. There are times where he has this stare, or he has a look in the camera, and it's kind of like Jason Momoa with cheesy lines.
Yeah.
Only he can pull it off, and only he can do it in such a way that makes you feel entertained and scared at the same time.
It was a great development for Arnold in the 90s too, because he was coming off the 80s when he was a more serious action star. I mean, things like Predator and Commando had comedic moments in it, but they were still played way more straight than these movies in the 90s were. So it was almost like Arnold was kind of, and I'm psychologizing a little bit here, but it was almost like he was acknowledging his relationship with the audience a little bit. And he was like, yeah, here I am. I'm the biggest action star in the world right now, but even I know how ridiculous I look sometimes. So the movies and the characters that I'm going to produce are going to talk about that to an extent. I think that was the right move to make.
Well, that's actually kind of one of the reasons we started this new sort of bonus podcast, was because watching these old films from the lens of today and having seen the before and after of what Arnold and all the actors have done really puts a lot of context behind it. And our taste in movies have changed over the years, and True Lies still holds a very special place in my heart because it was one of the few action movies I watched growing up, and I loved almost every single part of it. It's very accessible to people of all ages, even though it's rated R, I think.
No, I mean, personally, I probably wouldn't bring a kid who was younger than a teenager to it.
I didn't see this in theaters. I just saw this on TV, but my mom just never really filtered anything. She was always watching it in the same room as me, and there are times where she'd be like, "Oh no, don't watch," but it was always too late, right? She'd be like, "Jason, don't watch," and I'll be like, I'm not watching, and I'll have like one eye closed and one eye open kind of deal. But yeah, this is one of the many 90s movies that I loved, and I'm glad that you liked it too. So
yeah, and I think there's obviously hundreds, if not thousands, of options in this kind of decade for us to look at in future bonus episodes like this. But yeah, it's been, sometimes with the trying to keep up to date on every new movie that's coming out on the podcast can be a bit of a grind. So it's fun to be able to kind of flash back and, fill in these gaps.
Yeah. And we're all the better for it. So anyway, that concludes this episode of True Lies.
If you're looking for us to get back into our pre-awards talk, we will definitely be doing that in the next episode, where we'll probably be talking about such things as Judas and the Black Messiah and maybe Minari. That should be available in Canada by the time that episode hits, as well as anything else that kind of comes out in between.
So that does it for this episode. My name is Jason Chen in Vancouver.
And my name is Robert Snow in Toronto. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.